Well, we've spoken a bit about truths that are contained within it, but also started to veer onto where the application of critical theory starts to have a negative influence on the world. Besides the truths, what are the obvious contradictions within it? Where does it find itself tangled up in knots?
Well, I think one of the most obvious problems with critical theory is, although I think we might say its ambition is an admirable one, and that ambition is to get out from under categories that turn people into things, it ends up merely treating people as things, that we become a new set of categories. We lose our personal individuality and value, and we become valued by a new set of categories, whether we're, say, LGBTQ, for example, would be one. If you look at the sexual revolution, which is intimately connected to Herbert Marcuse, the sexual revolution, the smashing of the old sexual mores that really guarded the nuclear family in the West. There was this idea, Marcuse had the idea of, if we can smash the sexual mores that guard the nuclear family, it will lead to a fundamental reconfiguring of society along more just lines. Well, think about the sexual revolution. It smashed the old oppressive structure of the family, but it has arguably unleashed on the world more objectification of other human beings than we've ever seen. And we see this now with sort of dissident feminists like Mary Harrington and Louise Perry pointing out that actually the sexual revolution, it promised liberation for women, but what it really did was it made them more the sexual tools and playthings of men than ever before. Pornography promises this life of free hedonism, but ends up turning women into sex slaves. So I think one of the real problems with critical theory, and you see this on a grand scale, of course, with the great left-wing nations of the old Soviet bloc. What does Marxism do? Marxism ultimately did not liberate. It turned people more into replaceable widgets than was ever dreamed of in Western capitalism, to the extent that you could simply systematically get rid of millions of them and consider it to be nothing at all of any great significance. So I think in practical terms, the real problem of critical theory is it has an admirable ambition, make people people again. Unfortunately, it makes them more into things than they'd ever been before.
Your description of the sexual revolution, I also picked up on within the book, particularly where you talked about the hypersexualized culture that we live in and how it has paradoxically led to, not paradoxically, it's obviously ended up leading to a less safe world for women. And it's obviously led to that because critical theorists don't believe there's a human nature, whereas most people would understand that men are even more overtly sexual than women, insofar as there are much less investment costs for them to be able to make in which to have offspring. And so all of this stuff, the social norms that we have built up through civilization building, whether it's the classical culture of antiquity melding with Christianity over time, throwing that all on the bonfire, this idea of chivalry has effectively led to women being less safe. And I think what's quite interesting is this whole approach of transforming the world, throwing away everything that was built upon to start afresh. We spoke about C.S. Lewis before the show, and I prepared a quote from his Abolition of Man, which is, "We make men without chests and expect from them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honour under shops to find traitors in our midst." And ultimately, the Christian culture was one of chivalry. It was one of equalizing the sexes, in that upon marriage, the man as much as the woman subverted themselves and subsumed themselves within the woman for that union of souls, to say, do you know what, I'm going to commit myself to you. I'm not going to go get a harem of women. I'm not going to treat you like any old thing. Is you are the mother of the family, and I commit everything to you, and I'll do everything for you. And by throwing that to one side, denouncing it as the patriarchy, we've now led to a world where women are being picked up and put down left, right, and center. And on the flip side, you've got lots of men who feel utterly useless and unable to contribute to things because they've been told that they're inherently bad, evil. Any idea of taking responsibility is patriarchal and it diminishes a woman. And so these contradictions within them has led to pretty destructive civilizational impacts. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct, John. One could sort of boil it down to saying the problem with critical theory on this level is it tends to reduce all human relationships to power and power struggles. So everything becomes manipulative. And it's one reason why you have this odd confluence in the early Frankfurt School of Marx and Nietzsche. We tend not to think of Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche as particularly compatible thinkers. But what they share in common is this: a very, very cynical view of human relationships. And if you reduce, let's say you reduce marriage to a form of chattel slavery, the man has his domestic slave for his sexual needs and his food needs and to produce him children to continue his line. If that's what you think of marriage, then of course the destruction of marriage becomes a good thing. It is the thing that liberates women. But if you understand human relationships as far more complex than that, yes, there are manipulative dimensions too, but there are also elements of responsibility that, there is such a thing as nature, and nature carries with it natural obligations. Then I think you end up with a situation where you can counter this stuff. Whereas, actually, it's not patronizing for the woman bringing up children to have a man to protect her. It's not that the man is doing that to lord it over the woman. It's actually his obligation to do that, and he better do it, or he may be held to account for it. So I think that what you're pointing to there is really a very cynical view of human nature. And I wrote a little article a couple of weeks ago on hospitality. I read a review in the London Review of Books of Jacques Derrida's concept of hospitality. And Derrida had a very cynical view of hospitality. We like to think that hospitality is us being kind to other people. Well, no. When you invite guests into your house, you're subtly reminding them that you own the house, that they're only there on your sufferance, that you stand above them because you are giving them benevolence, because you can. They cannot give you benevolence. They can only receive. Well, I want to suggest that, there may be something of that when we give hospitality. And maybe there is a little bit of a feeling of, haven't I done well? I was hospitable to those people. But I also think there's something beautifully human about that. I gave hospitality to people. I acknowledged the common humanity in somebody else. I acknowledged that I'm not an island, that I, with my wealth, exist with some kind of obligation towards others, the stranger in the midst. So I want to say that critical theory, it has far too for all of the sophisticated jargon, it has far too simplistic a view of what it means to be a human being, which is that everything kind of comes down to manipulative ploys of one kind or another. And I want to say, no, that's not what human beings are. And we all know that that is not what human beings are. I still remember with great joy the hospitality extended to me when I was a lonely student arriving in the city of Aberdeen, knowing nobody, and somebody offered me lunch after church on a Sunday. It meant a lot to me. Did it make them feel good about themselves? Well, maybe. But I also think they did it because they were kind and they recognized something of a common humanity that we shared and the obligations that that brings. So I find critical theory lacks a certain, well, it has a very ugly view of what it means to be human lying at the heart of it that I find experientially implausible.